Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG
Rose?
Rose. And now that we've said that, you can no longer exist in a universe where you didn't hear those words put in your head.
You've been incepted.
Yeah, it's done. The thought is in your head. That movie is amazing, by the way. If you haven't seen that movie, you must. Christopher Nolan is extraordinary. I actually go to the movie theater to see his films.
And Daniel never goes to the movie theater.
I remember seeing that movie all those years ago. I was like, what is this masterpiece? And it was tragic because with COVID, you couldn't go to see Tenet, and I still haven't seen Tenet, and I'm ashamed to say that because it's apparently really, really something.
Wow, I just lost a major culture point.
No, you didn't even know. It's okay.
I had no idea that
there
that
was no
was a
culture in
movie.
2020. Everyone lost a culture point. Don't worry, it is okay. But the papers that talks about Inception and freedom is kind of this idea that once I say something to you, how was your day? You can no longer exist in a world where you're not asked how was your day.
And kind of seeing it in that framework.
Yeah, was it good? Was it bad? Well, before maybe your day was a lot more expansive than good or bad. It was like beautiful. It was lovely. It was fun. It was dynamic. It was hard, but it was really, really dynamic. But now that I ask you, was your day good or bad? Did you have a good day? You tend to say, oh, it was good, and you have almost no choice but to be so framed and to so think about your day. And in a way, this kind of suggests that we have free will, precisely because I'm able to take something from you, and you feel it. You feel framed when people say things to you, which suggests that you lost something, which would suggest you had free will. But yeah, once somebody asks you, "Did you have a good day?" You're thinking about it in those terms, or are you happy, for example?
Yeah.
When now it's like, am I happy? Like, I am happy, I'm not happy. When that language, when before you were neither happy nor unhappy, maybe there was other language that you had, but now it's like the moment someone asks you that question, are you happy, it's almost like you can't even remember what you were. It's like you're trapped thinking in those terms.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, did you have a good days? I mean, I think it still applies, but I think it feels a bit more innocuous, maybe just because of how common it is. It's interesting. I think it's almost, I have felt less of the freedom takeaway in that question. However, I could understand how it would be still an example of that, because now you're thinking about it, like you said, in terms of, did you have a good day or did you have a bad day?
Oh, sure.
Because
And it is a common phrase that people use. So maybe, do you like your job?
Well,
do you, stuff like that.
Right. Did you have a good day is almost just like,
No one asks it seriously. No
Well,
one means it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why, for some reason, I think about it. Maybe that's true. Maybe I'm thinking more just like, how are you? Or how's your day going? Those leave it a little bit more open, though that's still a type of inception, even with that question. But it gets even more framed in with when you get into adjectives and qualifiers, right? Yeah. Which is not, it's just how it is. I mean, the thing is that, should people stop asking, did you have a good day? No, I mean, I don't think so. At the same time, though, it does make you more aware if you're going to say those, if you're going to ask, did you have a good day?
Right.
Right. Or, being aware of this that occurs, the inception, I think can make one more aware and maybe even more careful, because there are certain framings that can really you've kind of now just jettisoned the person into possibly asking themselves a whole lot of questions on things.
Questions,
exactly.
Right.
And questions are great, but it's just, you're also just having a conversation, and you want to be aware that things you say can incept a thought into the person's mind, and they weren't thinking about it beforehand.
And now they're framing themselves in those ways. And the very framing takes away from them the possibility of getting at the right answer. Like a true answer. Like, I think the question, like, if you ask someone, do you like your job?
Yeah.
For example,
or do you have a good job?
Do you have a good job? And the person's like, does like really describe? I mean, I wouldn't go if I wasn't paid, but seeing as I have to do something to get paid, I don't mind it. And I also have days that I enjoy it. Some day, but I don't like getting up at 6 a.m. to go to it. How is this all captured in terms of like or dislike? It really doesn't do it, but the question poses it to you in such a way that you think of it as like or dislike. And that can have some trouble, because if you answer, no, I dislike it, well, then the person's like, well, then why do you do it? But if you say, oh, I like it, then that may kind of gloss over all of the intricacies, sacrifices, that the person has done to do it, to make it possible, and then everything just becomes thought about in terms of like or dislike when motivations are far more complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And also could, if it's like, yes, it was good, it just, like you said, doesn't get into the nuances. So I think it leaves people with more, to relate to the Ho-Ho paper, if, these are more just, when it gets to be these generalities of like, it was good, it was bad, it's just more space. Okay. It's more space to project into. Or say like, oh, well, that person, oh, okay, there's like this platonic ideal work that somebody could do that would be good.
Right.
Just because the person's having to use that terminology because you framed it that way for them, which then sort of perpetuates your own possible thinking on what is a good job versus bad job, or that it exists, or how it exists, etc.
Oh yeah, and then you start thinking about everything as you do because you like it, or don't do it because you dislike it, and then there's no, well, if you just did it because you like it, there's no honor in it, or you like it, it's just everything's kind of arbitrary, everything kind of feels empty. Right, and then when somebody does an actual job in a day in and day out experience, they're kind of, again, it can just be like, you think about the other person who just said it was good, and you're like, well, this is good and bad, this is fun and hard, or whatever, which is life. It will be both. So, well, I mean, you have a giant supply chain issue. I promise you, a very large number of people who make the supply chain around the world possible don't just do it because they like it. They do it because it's a job and there's some nobility in it. It's hard. It's blue collar work. But if you've created an entire culture that has made people feel like they shouldn't do work unless they like it, exactly. And you see, critically, you therefore assume if people are doing the work, they do like it, and therefore there's no honor in it. So then those people don't feel like they get any respect for doing that hard work they do, and so they don't come back. Yeah. They leave, and then you can. So that's just an example where that thinking of everything in terms of like and dislike can actually have very practical consequences on things. Right, and a lot of that gets perpetuated with the inception that with it happens the small talk. With language, because it's like, do you like your job? Do you not like your job? Yeah. And I think I think that to give people the benefit of the doubt, they're probably asking because, people on the whole, I don't know, I guess maybe some people can take delight in people not. Oh, sure. But I think on the whole, I think if somebody's being genuine, they probably just want to know that the person like is happy, right? Like just want to know they're happy and that they on the whole like their job or whatever, like their work. Yeah. But the risk is that you always see things in terms of like, not like. Yes. And then it's hard to unplug from that. You get habituated to it. That dichotomy. Right you get habituated to it. Yeah. And once you're habituated to it, it's very hard to not associate being happy meaning you're doing it right or you're doing what you're supposed to do, when often the most important things in life are a complex dance between difficulty, happiness, joy, perseverance, all these fuller things. But the nature of like thinking about small talk as Inception, it's always putting in your head the idea, because of what the kind of questions that genuinely constitute small talk tend to be: do you like it? How will you fit? Different things like that. Well, then it's almost like your freedom is taken from you to think about life more complexly, to think of life in more dynamic ways, and then you habitually give into that, or you're kind of habituated to go in that direction, especially if the people around you are asking just kind of out of nicety and it's not a serious question, and if you respond with a fuller answer they kind of look at you funny. So then everyone is kind of gradually incepted to think of life one-dimensionally. It's put in everyone's head, and it's kind of emergent because no one's meaning to do it to one another, but it gradually creates a kind of collective where people think of terms, things. The collective takes away its freedom to think of things more dynamically, not because anyone's intending it. It's just kind of what happens, almost like in the conversation with Lou about the instinct collective. And then everyone is incepted to think about things one-dimensionally, and then it self-perpetuates itself. It kind of perpetuates itself. And then people are trying to understand all of life in terms of like and dislike, and it doesn't quite work. And then people, as a result, can feel hurt because of it. They can feel confused, discouraged. If they go to work and they feel like they're just doing because they like it, people make them feel that there's discouragement. And then it collectively kind of makes everyone feel kind of... it's almost like everyone is kind of collectively imprisoned in that dichotomy, and to think through those dichotomies. And there's other ones than like and dislike, but it's one of the ones that are most pressing when it comes to small talk conversation. Oh yeah. I mean, it's really important. It's really huge because it's the like dislike, which is incepted with small talk. What I was thinking about while you were talking, that I think is very interesting, is that it seems like
in the small talk arena, you know, people are just sort of just talking, and it's almost like it's a very interesting dynamic, because okay, so the question is posed, do you like your job, for example. It's weird. It's like it can complexify the mind of the one receiving that question, because now the person's like, well, do I like my job? Do I not like my job? Am I doing my passion?
Right.
Am I not doing my passion? All of this stuff, all of these other questions can sometimes arise for the person, possibly.
Oh, sure.
But the person asking just really wants to know, do you like your job or not? But it's weird. It's almost like it can complexify, but also strangely, like you're saying, simplify to like or not like. I guess what I mean to say is, like, to think about a question like that when you receive it. Do I like my job? Right. It's like, it's weird because it almost sends you. It's almost like the talk is trying to do something like philosophizing in a sense.
Oh, sure.
But it's not.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like sort of strangely truncated, because it seems as though sometimes those who are giving out the question, not necessarily, it depends on who the person is, but small talk, in a way, if we're going to be general about it, it's typically going to stay in the small talk arena.
Sure.
So to actually receive an answer and then have a full dialogue that's on the complexified level, it's a mismatch. Exactly. Thank you. It's a mismatch.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's a question that really actually gets into a lot more complexity.
Yes, that's
but
exactly.
People expect a simplified answer, but yet the person's mind is probably still off in, like, you know, not crazy land, but possibly crazy land. But it's not. They're not equipped with any of the conversational exchanges to know how to think through. Oh, wait a second. I don't have to just think about my job in terms of like or dislike.
Oh, yes, and with with the inception that we're describing, there is also the habituation of responding to philosophical questions. Because if you think about it, do you like your job is actually kind of philosophical.
Exactly.
What does it mean to work? What is a job? What does it mean to like it?
Yeah.
You know, what is like? You can get into philosophical. But so the point is, you get habituated to responding to philosophical questions with shallow answers. And also, you get habituated to thinking that you should so respond to philosophical questions with shallow answers, and even you get habituated to not even thinking about the questions as being philosophical.
Yes.
And again, with the inception language, it's like your freedom is taken from you to think alternatively. Like, you didn't ask to be put under the pressures of being habituated to thinking shallowly about these things, to knowing that mismatch is going on, so always responding in a shallow way. But now you're kind of thrown into it in the Heidegger sense.
Right.
And so then when you're faced with that situation you didn't choose, you have two questions, and it's kind of existential. Do you fight it or do you conform to it? And then, of course, what does it mean to fight it? Like, you then find out that you have to learn the certain social graces, like the certain social ways of interacting with people that are not off-putting. But then at the same time, you have to learn to fight your own mind's tendency to habituate itself to responding to these philosophical questions with not full answers. So you're having to fight internally while also learning kind of the social dynamics that you need to get by with.
Sure, and that's so true. And I think that, you know, again, small talk has a place, and it's going to exist, and it's going to happen. And it makes me think. I was talking with a friend about this idea of, like, that philosophy is always there, right? Like, it's always like the way we engage with the world and ourselves and others. Even small talk is interestingly a form of, like you're saying, you're asking. These questions are being asked, okay, and people don't necessarily acknowledge them as philosophical, but they still have ideologies ideas behind them. And so it's interesting because I think it gets really reduced. There's so much more fullness, robustness that could happen in these conversations. And there are some people who are there for it. You know, they're very ready, prepared to kind of like get into it, really.
Right.
But there's a lot who are not. But it's weird because it is still philosophical. It's almost like your brain gets turned on in that direction.
It does, and I was going to comment. It goes chaotic instead of like dynamic, instead of deeper. It's almost like there's a difference between depth and chaos.
Yeah, it's almost like it. If you think of just like a little ping pong ball, just going like, you know, like just like bouncing off all of the walls of your mind. That's sometimes what these types of inception questions or thoughts or comments can do. but if we acknowledge that there is something actually philosophical about all dialogue, right?
Yeah.
All dialogue, actually.
Yes.
Then I think that would better equip us to understand that I can, instead of it just being bouncing like all over the place, maybe we can like kind of allow that to either, I don't know, I have this analogies, I'm not really thinking through what the next part of how this ping pong ball could be in one's mind, but perhaps it could be a little bit more ordered, or perhaps going in a certain direction, or making some sort of progression or something like that.
Well, I mean, if I got a wheelbarrow full of bricks and tools, I can dump it all, and now there's a mess. Or I can gradually take out the pieces and orderly construct the thing I want to make. If I just dump it out of the wheelbarrow, which ends up happening, can happen. You're asked how was your day? The person's just asking, not really thinking about what they're asking. It's like they dumped your wheelbarrow, and you're like, I don't know. But if you actually kind of have a little bit of philosophical training, it's like you can almost grab your wheelbarrow before it's tipped off, tipped over, and start to kind of orderly kind of construct it. Well, if you take seriously the idea, now that I'm looking at this couch, I can never exist in a world where I don't look at this couch at this moment, right? Your freedom, in a sense, is always being taken because you're always spending your freedom on one experience versus another. But the experience of the couch that I can no longer escape really doesn't mean much to me because it's not conscious. But when you encounter people, like, they have minds, and you can hurt them, and they can hurt you, or you could love them, and they could love you. So there's a cost, right? There's a cost. That there's a risk that's entailed. And so the dilemma of Inception, the fact that, once they say something, you can't exist in a world where they don't say something, becomes very real. You don't have to worry about the couch speaking to you.
Yes.
So then what ends up happening is whenever you deal with people, it's not, you really feel the fact that you could be pulled into a world you don't choose. You can feel that they could break your heart. You really feel it, where you don't really feel it with inanimate objects.
Yes.
And the thing is, if you take that seriously, then me personally, I don't ever want to be someone that the people I meet after I leave go, well, now I can't leave this world I'm in, now I've been pulled into something I can never escape. So you don't yell at them, you don't get mad at, you kind of pay a little more attention to how you interact with them, because you don't want to put people in a world they can't escape as a result of, that they don't want to be in, that they can't escape because of your presence, and people tend to feel that way if you make their mind go crazy. Like if you say something that sends their mind in a ping pong direction, and existentially, the language is anxiety. You've caused existential anxiety for them. And it's critical if you take the Inception stuff seriously, you think about being sure that you're not someone who creates existential anxiety for other people, because they can no longer, once they run into you, they can no longer be in a world where they don't run into you. So you want them to feel like that was actually almost more grace. In Christianity, there's the idea of grace that you don't have control over, and it's a good thing. It's like, God's pure will, as opposed to falling into something that they can't get out of, like a prison cell. So you think about it. And the other thing that ends up happening, like the other paper we talk about, Metamentality, is the idea that if you cause someone's brain to kind of fly all over the place, then they become very anxious, and they're thinking about what you're thinking and what you think that they're I start thinking what you're thinking, and then then I think what you're thinking I'm thinking, then I'm thinking about what you're thinking I'm thinking you're thinking. You have this rabbit hole that you go down where you're always trying to figure out what the other person is thinking so that they're not upset, because you've been trained to think that you can say wrong answers to them. You've been trained to think that anxiety can be created around them. So then I think the other thing that's happened today is an explosion of that metamentality. That has also happened, where everyone is kind of always wondering what other people are thinking, and they're always nervous because that gets tied into where you no longer have societal givens anymore. It's no longer given what's you should believe, given what's polite, given what's nice, so on and so forth. And so then the stakes are really raised when you run into people, because you don't even you don't even know the foundational premises according to which you should operate them on them. And I think if you take seriously that everyone is undergoing these sort of tensions, you think about how you act around people, because you don't want to make their you don't want to cause any ping balls in their head the best you can help it. Sometimes you cause ping balls and the person just simply is there's some self-responsibility to controlling your own mind and not reading into things, but you also can do your best not to add to the anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought of a better imagery to. So I was thinking about like a pinball, okay, like silver pinball, just kind of all going, all over the place, right? So there's that, okay. But the thing is, your mind will be set off in a sense, right? But those, like, I wish I knew the name of this, but it's kind of like in a way metronomic or something, where you have these little silver balls on strands, okay, like silver, these little, and then you pull one to the edge, and you let it go. And it transfers its energy through the row of silver balls, and then the other one lifts up, and like it goes back and forth and back and forth. In a way, it's almost like that is what I think understanding Inception and understanding, like being equipped to understand that actually all of our dialogue and engagements will then create like a new world that you can't really not be in. And that your mind will possibly be set off, but at least there's a sense in which there's like something metronomic about it. And it's suddenly not just like noise, but it's music,
Oh yeah.
So anyways, that was just an image that to maybe kind of compare, right? Where you have the scattered pinball going all over your mind, and you have the more steady, perhaps that maybe a good way, metronomic pinball, these little silver balls with a rhythm of going back and forth. And I do think that often if one finds themselves like not sure how to get from the erratic type of pinball to the metronomic, a lot of times just to understand that, thinking it out, reading, writing can all be really, really great tools. If for some reason you've kind of been thrust into something with some questions, to be able to say, okay, well, I understand that my brain is doing this not because like something's wrong with me, but just because actually the nature of dialogue and incepting thoughts and questions into our mind is actually philosophical. So my brain is actually doing something that it should be doing. But if I can kind of make it more metronomic, there could be some sort of stability and order to that. So, and I think things that can help with that are like to read, write, and sort of put that into something, even to write a poem. Even to write a poem, to kind of mark that. And kind of be another bead in this sort of chain of beads that kind of transfer the energy from one side to the other.
Oh yeah.
There's like a dialogue of energy with
Oh sure.
So
and one, like the reading and writing of those practices, and then two, recognizing the very dynamic of Inception can make you more careful.
But it's interesting. Well, the thing is that if you do more of the reading and writing, which again just can be a helpful I don't know, practice or something. Sure. It's quieter, isn't it?
Yeah,
right.
It
like it's expressing, right? But it's not actually putting it on another person, right? Yes. Unless they choose to read what you want to, or pick up the book you want to that you've been reading, or something like that. So I think practices of quiet expression could be helpful to actually
no inception going.
Yeah, because there's no inception going on there now, unless somebody chooses to I don't know, read it or something like that. But
it's not thrown on.
It's not thrown on anyone.
Yes.
If they do it voluntarily, well, they're kind of putting in a way that sort of shows their openness, or it could mean an openness to whatever they could read or could hear, and they're in kind of a different position to go out and get it themselves versus it being like thrown on them, right?
Oh yeah.
So that's maybe could be and I just wonder, we don't do the quiet expression as much these days.
Not at all.
Letter writing.
No, we don't.
Reading.
So there's a lot of there's a ton of verbal processing.
Absolutely. So I think this makes it even more this potential risk or problem. I mean, everything can be a risk, but the things that can be then existentially destabilizing for people with Inception, right? And the Inception dichotomies, loss of freedom, or it's even more potentially problematic.
Absolutely.
Because we have so little space for the quiet expression.
Everything is
for
posted
the uninception
online.
expression.
Yeah, everything is verbal. I mean, it's social media, you're talking, there's not quiet space. So there's like an explosion of Inception. I mean, the point you're making that's so explosive, that's so so critical, is this idea that like there's a difference between processing or exploring your thoughts in private.
Yes, exactly.
And throwing them on other people, making them public, or verbally processing, or different things. And people say, well, it's just different personalities. They say, well, I'm a verbal processor and you're a writer. Well, maybe, yes, surely there are personality differences and orientations, but they're not equal, because one causes Inception and the other doesn't. One of them can set off minds, to go off in a ping pong direction. The other is helping you be that metronome, that you're describing, that ping pong. So, writing is where you're like creating the metronome rhythm. But when you do verbal processing, maybe it can get you to a metronome place, but there's a huge risk
to
of
it being
pinball.
erratic pinball.
That then goes into
other
other people's minds, and who knows where it goes, after that. And see, today, like you say, there's no practices of the quiet. There's a few practices of the quiet. So everyone is incepting everyone else, forcing you to think about their business. You're having to think about the media is making you think about something in California.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing. Even if it's like, well, it's a flat text, Michelle, it's quiet. Yeah. No, but a public post that has words that somebody's saying, or some news piece from, like you said, California, is not quiet. It is public now. We're talking about private versus, public.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where golly, it's happening all day long,
constantly. And it's part of why everyone feels anxious, because their freedom's being taken. You're no longer free to exist in a world where you don't think about
the thing that happened in California.
Yeah, the planes flying over Taiwan, or this horrible event that happened somewhere, like the grand technology comes from. And then if it's on the news, then everyone knows that you know about the news thing, and you haven't posted about it or said anything, so then you're wondering what they think about you for not having said anything, and they're thinking about you, and then the metamentality explodes, because everyone's thinking about what everyone else is thinking, because everyone collectively has their freedom taken in regard to not knowing about the thing, or now they know about it, and then within that space of where everyone collectively has had their freedom taken, you're already existentially destabilized, and then you add on it the relational element, because everyone knows that everyone else is in that boat, and then the metamentality takes off. It explodes.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a very interesting point, because knowing everybody knows something was on the news then feeds the small talk, right?
Yes.
Which is where a lot of these kind of inceptional questions can be. And so that's fascinating, because I feel like they feed each other.
Oh, absolutely, they feed each other.
Yeah, and then the other thing with the metamentality, which is, I'm thinking, you're thinking, I'm thinking, or vice versa, whatever. Yes. That's even, like we've talked about, it's always been an aspect of, like, the human condition to try to think about what does somebody else think. Yes. And you talk about how it's a lot of times in love. Love is where you kind of experience that maybe most predominantly. Yes. Does he like me? Does she like me?
Yes. What is he thinking?
What is she thinking about me? Yeah.
Yes. What does he think I'm thinking?
Exactly. Yeah. What does he think I'm thinking? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's always been a part of the human condition, but it's exacerbated now because I think too, the thing is, you can always, it's strange. It's almost as if the visibility of social media, for example, and these things. If you're aware of it, you can curb the paranoia of it. But the thing is, if you're not aware of this potential problem, then I don't know. It's almost like there's almost a way in which I think it's even more present. It's weird. It's like people are not as present physically, but they're more present constantly.
Yes.
In this with social media and technologies, where you could reach a person instantaneously, or they could to you. Yes. So metamentality, it's almost like you've got it just makes it even more, more problematic with metamentality, because it's almost like, though you don't actually, and you never have, and you never will, but it's almost like the technology makes us feel more like we have a greater and more constant access to people's minds. Oh, yes. Like what they're thinking, if they do respond, if they don't respond. Oh, well. If they do say something, if they don't say something. And we it's very easy, because they could, to just assume and think that they must be thinking X about me, or yes. And so it just kind of exacerbates that problem. I think for sure. In extraordinary ways.
If you get an email and you haven't replied to it, you wonder what they're thinking about you, because you haven't replied to it, and then they're wondering what you think, and there's all these dynamics.
And one could say, well, just don't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It's like we could recognize that, but a lot of people don't realize that it's actually a problem.
And even when you say don't think about it, though, sometimes it is a problem. Yeah, because sometimes it is a problem, and you do think about it, and also you have to train yourself, and you I don't think about my inbox, and now there's 500 emails, and you miss the bills and different things. Like, that strategy of not thinking about it, basically, if you take it seriously, must mean you go to isolationism. Like, you become an isolationist, because if you literally don't think about it at all, then you socially you get problems. You miss emails that do matter, and you miss on social graces that do matter, and there are consequences. So you have to learn. It's worse. You have to learn when to think about it and when not to think about it, and what does that look like. And the chances that you'll be able to strike that balance without any quiet times of reading and writing are very low. because you don't even have any self-training.
Right, and that's because that's kind of to the point of like, in some ways, like there's a healthy level of not caring what people think.
Yes.
But then there's also a healthy level of caring what people
Yes,
think. Like you're
that's
not just
correct.
going to go around, I don't know, like at 3 a.m., like, you know, just like
Banging,
blowing
like
on your bullhorn or something like
you
that.
don't care what other people think or
I mean,
whatever.
yeah,
That's right.
exactly. Like, because
Right.
you're just like, well, I shouldn't care what people think.
Yes.
But now you're like waking up all
Yeah,
of your neighbors
everyone.
or whatever,
Yeah, they hate
whatever.
you. Yeah, and
Or
for
your
good
pals
reason.
or whatever,
Yeah, right,
whoever-
that's right.
whoever's around you.
Well, the very fact that you just described it very well, like you know, you shouldn't, you know,
There's
you
a healthy
should
level
not
of-
care what other people
Exactly.
think. The not has to be in parentheses. So that's right there is the breeding ground of the metamentality.
Yes.
Because when do you determine when you should and when you shouldn't?
Yeah, when you
What
should
is
care,
that?
yeah.
That's a philosophical skill.
Exactly.
And what have you been trained by small talk and Inception not to do? Philosophical skills. And so you're habituated not to do it. So
Absolutely.
the metamentality, so the Inception feeds itself, creates a metamentality, the metamentality then creates the Inception, and all while it's training you to be incapable of being properly oriented to it.
And this feeds it too, because if it does for you set off this, you know, pinball going off in your mind, like just kind of distractedly knocking over lamps
Yes,
in your head
yes,
and stuff.
yes.
Why do you have lamps in your head?
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
that's right.
No, I'm just
But then you
kidding.
wonder that. Why do I even have, what kind of person has lamps in it? And it accelerates.
But it's kind of like you know, because that's how some people feel with questions. They don't, that, you know, that should actually make them go more toward philosophy and ideas and thinking and
Yes.
writing and reading.
Yes.
It makes them less inclined
Yes.
because all they associate it with is destruction.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And the loose pinball, the loose cannon, basically.
Well, the idea that like philosophy's greatest problem is philosophy.
Yeah.
And so, but right there, it's like, so we're basically saying that in order to handle a world of constant inception and constant metamentality, you have to learn philosophy. That sounds like we're saying the solution to thinking is thinking. And so it's like, that makes no sense. What are you talking about? I've learned that thinking is bad because all thinking ever does is make me crazy.
Yeah.
So why in the world would I want to do philosophy? And then it doesn't help if we associate philosophy with the madman and all that different stuff. That's why it's really critical to understand that philosophy is not another thing to think about. It is the skill of thinking.
Yes.
It is a how. It is a way of thinking, not a thing to think about primarily. You know, that's why in philosophy, you don't really have subjects of philosophy. Philosophy is like philosophy of medicine, philosophy of relationships, philosophy of politics. If you think about it, all the things following the of are not from philosophy. They're outside of philosophy. Philosophy, the subjects of philosophy come from outside of philosophy. Even when you take the philosophy of mind, where does the mind come from? Neuroscience, you know, except we can go on. And so philosophy is about a how and an orientation. And so when we're saying you need the quiet time to learn how to train your mind and to be philosophical, if you think of philosophy as just thinking, well then yeah, you're going to be like, why would I do that? My whole problem is overthinking.
Exactly.
But if you understand
exactly.
but if you think but if you understand the skill of thinking, of how to think, well then it becomes utterly necessary, especially today. Even though you're, exactly to your point, Michelle, everything is telling you not to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, I was just kind of chuckling to myself because I was thinking about this meme.
Oh.
There's this like giant cat.
I'm glad
like
you were incepted.
Yeah, right. I know exactly. All these memes incepting our lives and minds. But there was this giant cat with this force field, like a little like lightning bolt between its hands, and it was like in the ocean, like this giant cat, okay, in the ocean, and it was behind all these people running like as if it was about to create a tsunami. And all of the people were like biology, like, you know, physics, English, all these different subjects, and in the back it was the cat and it was like philosophy. And it was just hilarious because it was kind of like, it's the force, right? It's not one of the little people running the subjects. It's
Right.
kind of like it's always in the background, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's a PhD, is a philosophy of, you know, we've said before. And one of the things that's really messed us up is thinking about philosophy as a subject.
Exactly.
Not a skill set.
Yeah.
Not a how. That doesn't mean you can't study philosophers. That doesn't mean there aren't philosophical people.
Sure.
But it is primarily a skill. And
Yeah.
and it's also really important that everyone can have it. Like the moment you just ask a question that follows, you don't have to read Heidegger to do philosophy. If you look at a sunset and ask, oh, why do I, you know, it's beautiful. Why do I find it beautiful? Boom, you're there. You know, anyone can do this at any moment because anyone can ask those questions.
Yeah,
and
and that's really important because, you know, like you said, I think it's very true that people think like, well, why would I want to ever do private, quiet expression?
Yes.
because they're like, I just overthink. Like,
Yes.
I can't sleep, and I'm just
thinking all the time.
Yeah, I'm thinking all the time, and it's just it's awful, and I just want to get away from my thoughts.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
that's what most people feel or can feel.
Yes.
And it's like, no, but the whole point of like understanding the philosophy behind thinking.
Yes.
Is basically like the thinking behind thinking is to realize when you should think and when you shouldn't think, right?
Well, but I mean, basically, if you don't think deeply, you're going to overthink. You know,
I guess
people.
so.
You know,
Maybe people think like you'd never think, but
Well, they think thinking deeply is overthinking. They're not the same. You know, thinking
Exactly.
deeply. If you don't think deeply, you're going to overthink. You have no choice. You have to choose today. What do you want to do? You want to think deeply or you want to overthink? The internet is everywhere. You can't escape it. The social media, everything is there. So you are now constantly being incepted. You're constantly being primed into metamentality. You're constantly being told about hard, like in the Grand Technology paper, horrible things happening all around the world, and you're in it. So the choice is you're going to overthink or you're going to think deeply. So it's almost like history has arrived because of our information technologies, where it's no longer an option to take the middle. Unless you want to be totally isolated, you know, like we've talked about, like
Right.
you could be totally isolated. That's an option, but you really must mean it. Like, you know, if you're going to go off, then you really must be. But today, like, it's really a choice between, are you going to develop the skills to think deeply, or you're just going to end up overthinking. And I think a lot of the Bernanke meaning crisis is a result of overthinking. Not, you know, but overthinking though that isn't deep thinking. And so you overthink, and overthinking is where it's almost like the hamster wheel. You're just kind of running. I guess, what is it, the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland that runs around the tree, you know, whatever. There's a difference between that, overthinking, and the reason it's overthinking is because you're there. You know, you're not, you know, you're there. You're not going anywhere. You're just staying on the thought that person might be upset, and you're just residing on the thought that they might be upset, but you're not going anywhere. You know, so it's overthinking. So yeah, I mean, today, if you don't think deeply, you're going to overthink.
yeah. To play devil's advocate, you know the snake that's like eating its tail?
The Ouroboros or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if people are like, well, I'm going to end up just being like, that's what philosophy will ultimately lead me to anyway. So I may as well just kind of keep on my little hamster wheel because it's just going to be that, you know, snake eating its tail anyways.
I think there's a big difference between the inevitable cycles of history and being a hamster. You know,
Really?
Yeah, the
That's
snake.
really strange,
You know,
Daniel.
often the snake eating its tail is symbolic of the overarching macro movements of
Sure.
history. And even if I am called in some sort of macro movement of history, I don't want to be a hamster in the macro movements of history. But people, like I was talking to people just the other day who were basically making that argument. They were saying, well, you know, history repeats, therefore why bother? And it's like, well, history's pretty long, and
Yes.
it may take 100 years before it repeats, and you'll
still have your life.
You still have your life.
What are you going to do with your life?
Yeah, what are you going to do with your life? And also, it's like that because, well, it doesn't make a difference in the end. No, it does make a difference. It makes a tremendous difference. And in fact, if you had more people who were deeply thinking, perhaps the inevitable circularity of history
Exactly.
would be longer. And it would take longer before you make the mistakes of history. And then when the mistakes of history come up, maybe you smooth the wavelengths per se. Maybe they're not as severe in different things like that. So I think there is a difference between the possibility of an always repeating historical arc and hamster.
I think you're right with that.
We don't want to be hamsters. We want to be cats with lightning bolts in the ocean. That's what we want to be.
Giant fuzzy
cat
cats with lightning bolts.
So, ladies and gentlemen, don't let Inception or Metamentality get to you.
Yes.
Be a giant fuzzy cat in the ocean with a lightning bolt, and you will prevail, and you will overcome. This has been OG Rose.
Tomorrow we take a family photo all dressed up like giant fuzzy cats with electric bolts and like
lightning
they're
cats.
like, they are good parents. They're teaching their kids to be
Lightning king. Yeah, they're
cats.
teaching them. I'm wondering, cats don't like water. Cats don't like water, and then lightning bolts plus cat and water. That's quite the meme. That cat really has come to balance with all of the elements of the universe because it's able to be in water, hold lightning, and be massive. So that is who I want to be. Yeah, I want our kids to be that cat. I want it.
If they want to, we won't.
We
We
won't
won't
force it. Yeah,
we won't incept it into their
force that
minds.
into their
That has to be their goal or something.
No,
I did think that was interesting in your summary. How it's like even this concept of inception is now incepted into the mind.
You can't exist in a world without it. So hopefully, if it's a prison cell, don't tell us in the comments. You know, don't tell us in the comments.
I just have somebody, I'm envisioning somebody commenting now and just like drawing out, like meticulously taking like an hour of their day for some reason to draw out like what looks like jail bars with like hyphens or something with like that slash mark.
I was thought you were going to say draw a cat with a lightning bolt.
Like, I thought that was going to make sense, Michelle.
No. But you see, that if you you didn't commit Inception because I didn't know what you were saying. So that's deluge, nonsense. You escaped. You are not a fascist here. Because you are not be captured. Gosh, you're the only one fighting the Nazis here.
Maybe that's what Deleuze wanted. Deleuze Guattari, like they're like,
that was it.
We just don't want anyone to incept anyone anymore. We don't. Gosh darn it, we don't want anyone taking each other's freedom.
Fascism. I now understand Deleuze. Michelle, congratulations. You are not a fascist. This has been OG Rose for more
you can find us on Instagram.
Non-fascist material. You know, please join us on at ogrose.com, website, Instagram, Twitter, so on and so forth. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.